We're here to seek the truth. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to be reviewing The X-Files Season 1, Episode 4. It's called Conduit. So, spoilers for the episode. This is an episode that kind of brings back something that was in one scene in Episode 1 and expands upon it, which is Mulder's backstory with his sister going missing by basically having to investigate a somewhat similar case this episode. So, it gets kind of personal for him. It's sort of he gets more impassioned about this one than maybe we've seen in the past. And if nothing else, it sort of just reiterates, his driving force and why he's believing and passionate about all this stuff in the first place. So that's very much the focus of this one. But it also calls into question, again, speaking of reminding us of things that were in the pilot, this is the first one since the pilot where we get a meaty scene with Scully and her higher-ups talking about what Mulder's up to. Because we know that she's reporting back everything that's happening with the X-Files, but here we actually get another scene of her talking to the superior and him pointing out that Mulder wants funding for this trip to go and investigate this case, but the case that he wants to investigate is this, tabloid newspaper story of some mum saying her daughter was abducted by aliens and how ridiculous that is, and Scully tries to talk him out of it. She tries to intervene and sort of convince him not to want to take the case. But Mulder does have one piece of interesting evidence. Evidence might even be a strong word, but the mother in question was actually one of 5 witnesses when she was a little girl to a potential UFO when she was in the Girl Scouts. And that is kind of the intriguing, like, oh, there's something to this. Maybe she was targeted. If aliens are involved here, maybe she was targeted. Maybe she was marked to come back later and like take her offspring or something. Maybe they did something to her to mean that her child would have some special qualities that they want to do experiments on, whatever it may be. But that's kind of the interesting tidbit that's like, okay, there's something maybe to this. And we do get a scene, the opening scene is like a scene where they're in their camper and the mum wakes up and the little boy's like saying that the daughter's not there anymore, and there's a big bright light coming down from the sky. So very, very typical kind of like potential UFO stuff. I think this episode it's got some interesting little beats in it. It's I think what it succeeds at is I was genuinely not sure how it was going to end. Because, just to skip to the ending, like, they find the teenage girl, right? She ends up being discovered in the woods. The little brother is the quote-unquote conduit, and he's receiving messages in binary from the static on the TV screen. That's something that comes up throughout the episode, and that ultimately leads the mother and him to her general location, and then when Mulder and Scully get there at the end, they actually find her, and she's alive. And we'll go back into, that stuff a bit more detail, but I genuinely wasn't sure if they were going to find her at all, and I actually thought the most likely outcome was that they were going to find her dead body. And maybe this is just because I've spent my life watching TV shows at this point, but something about this felt like the episode that was going to give Mulder doubt. I don't know, like, I was expecting like a really sad ending where he realized that he couldn't save her, much like he couldn't find his sister, he couldn't save this girl, and there's enough hints in the episode to give you a plausible reason why she ran away, that maybe she got pregnant with an older boyfriend and they were going to try and deal with it somehow, and the boyfriends went missing, and eventually you find out the boyfriend's dead, and it kind of like opens a can of worms as to, okay, what actually is going on with all these characters. But for a little bit in the episode, it actually does seem like maybe they're going to build to an ending that's somewhat ambiguous, but like might just be a case of, oh no, this was completely normal and Mulder was barking up the wrong tree, and it doesn't do that. And I thought it might, because we're a few episodes in, there's been something genuinely science fiction-y going on in every episode so far. I did almost think this was going to be the one where it was, no, there's actually just a plausible explanation. And I do wonder if we're going to get an episode like that ever. Certainly, and if maybe even we get them every so often, that no, there actually isn't anything supernatural going on here. This is just the sad truth of it, is the mundane side of it. And I actually almost think it would make it more interesting in a lot of ways to see Mulder have to react to when he is just flat out wrong about like what he suspected. I think that could be really cool and really add some depth, and like the idea that okay, he's not always right, but it doesn't mean that his overall ideas are wrong. It just means that like not every single time he goes chasing a ghost, it's going to be a ghost, you know. So I generally wasn't sure, but there is some intrigue at the end though, because it kind of becomes there's this idea that this mother character has been her whole life talking about what happened to her as a little girl, and she's been kind of mocked for it and looked at kind of differently, and that's all been kind of come up again because she's saying that her daughter's been now taken by aliens or whatever, and she doesn't like how she's been treated. She doesn't like how her and her son end up getting taken in by the NSA or whatever it is because of some of the stuff that goes on in this episode. And at the end of the episode, when they've got the daughter back and she's in the hospital room, Mulder wants to talk to her. He wants to talk to her about her experiences, and he's got a really interesting. This was a really cool little detail. Is the Scully's talking about like her medical condition and talking about her blood, her is there anything wrong with her? Has she been drugged? So on, so on. And Mulder just asks a question about something specific. I'm not even going to pretend to remember what he asked about, but he asked if there was an elevation in this type of, something in the body. And Scully's like, yeah, how did you know that? And he points out that is a common effect of prolonged weightlessness. It's something that NASA has observed in astronauts. And I was like, oh, that's a really interesting little detail. Well, there's no real other evidence that she was up somewhere. That's a really interesting thing that, even Scully has to sort of do a double take when she hears what causes that. But I actually really liked the ending. I didn't think every step to get to the ending was necessarily always great, but I think what was good about this episode is, one, I genuinely didn't know how it was going to end, and when it did get to its ending, and it basically boils down to Mulder wanting to talk to this teenage girl and encourage her to be honest about what she saw, to encourage her to open, that he's there to listen to her and take her seriously. But the mother's like, you know what? No, I spent my entire life being mocked for saying that I saw something. I'm not having my daughter go through that. As far as we're concerned, she was just off with a biker for the last 3 weeks, and that's the story. And that's what we're going with. And Mulder tries to convince her that, to encourage the truth. And the woman just flat out says, the truth has caused nothing but pain. We don't care about the truth. I'm paraphrasing some of it there, but that was the vibe that she gives Mulder. And I thought that was a very interesting thing to have here. The phrase "the truth is out there" has been in the opening title since episode 2. The idea of the truth has come up a few times in these early episodes. And I think this idea of challenging it in a way that's different, because most of the episodes so far, the challenging of the truth has been shady government cover-ups, and we're hiding this, we're not going to reveal anything that's going on, it's all this shady stuff going on. I think it's actually really interesting and more nuanced and bittersweet for a character who knows that there's a truth to say, no, it's not worth it, and sort of effectively give up that fight. The fight that Mulder's never going to give up. He doesn't want to give up that fight. I think that was an interesting little point at the ending. I think that exchange was really good. And the episode then ends with 2 notable scenes that are tied together with audio, which is basically Scully is listening to a recording of when Mulder got hypnosis some time ago. And this is how he relived the memories of his sister being taken. And we hear this audio, and he's talking to the therapist or whoever, and it cuts to Mulder in the church looking at the photo or whatever of his sister and crying. And it's kind of a downer ending. But the audio is he's talking, it sort of just reiterates the things we heard in episode 1. He was, motionless. He could hear her calling for help. He couldn't see her. He sensed a presence. And he specifically says that he heard a voice in his head. And he didn't feel scared because the voice told him not to be scared. He knew he should be scared, but, whatever, psychic ability the alien had, he didn't feel scared. And the final line really stuck out because, I think it's one of the movies is called this, but I didn't know it had a specific moment that it came from. But the voice in his head said that no harm will come to your sister and one day she will return. And the therapist asks, do you believe the voice? And Mulder responds, I want to believe. So that phrase, I want to believe, is something I've seen in X-Files marketing. I think one of the movies is called that. I thought that was a really interesting use of that. I like this bit of lore that was thrown into Mulder's character here. I think that's really intriguing, especially this idea that one day his sister might come back, and I have genuinely no idea if they ever do it. I do not know. So do not tell me, because that's actually quite an interesting thing. Not that I'm falling into the trap of getting too invested in the overall arc of X-Files. I've been warned, but I did like this beat, and I think it was a tantalizing insight to things, because I think in this very episode it repeats a beat that was kind of in the first episode with the light coming from behind the trees. Later on, just before they find the girl, there's a moment where the boy, Kevin, Conduit Kevin, we'll call him, he is walking over to the tree line, and there's this light, and it looks like there's a UFO behind the trees, but it turns out just to be a bunch of bikers like coming towards them. And this was set up earlier. There's the guy in the bar mentioned that they ride out there and that they've seen UFOs. He's got a tattoo. His ear's been burned by something, and there's lots of evidence in the episode of like some intense heat from something. Sand that's turned to glass, the top of tree lines that have been like singed and things like that. And of course Mulder is immediately thinking this is like the heat off of whatever powers a UFO coming down. And it is intriguing to see like just the tip of these trees be singed and whatnot. But it's interesting. It does, and you do think about, okay, one of the things I said a little earlier was that, okay, what if this woman was marked when she was a child, and then later they came back and got her daughter? My thinking here, if I'm trying to like headcanon this, is that they, without her knowing it as a girl, they put something into the mother's body and came back and got her daughter because presumably she passed on something that they wanted her to pass on to an offspring so that they could do some tests on her. Now, this girl was returned, in 3 weeks. Give or take. We don't know how long she was necessarily lying there waiting to be found again, but give or take 3 weeks. Mulder's sister's been gone for, 25 years? Something like that. He was 8, I think it said, when she was taken, so... And he's about 30 now. I don't know what age Mulder's supposed to be, but that was it's an interesting comparison point as to why has she been gone so long. And I suppose the question is like, are we dealing, like, every time we're dealing with an alien and a UFO in this show, are we dealing with the same species? Are we dealing with the same group of aliens? Maybe not literally the same ship and like actual specific aliens each time, but are they all from the same culture? Are they all from the same planet? Or are we dealing with rival aliens doing shit? I don't know. These are the things my mind starts to think about when we're doing this stuff. Was Mulder's sister taken by a rival alien faction who are way more sinister? Or maybe not sinister, but just their experiments take a lot longer. They have to incubate her for a long time. They have to take her to some other planet, and it takes decades. She'll be back, and maybe she won't have aged. Maybe they've got like, not freezing, but like a stasis style tech or something where they maintain her same age. So for her, it's only been a few weeks, and she comes back as a 12-year-old. And Mulder's like, this is weird. I'm Big Brother now. I don't know. But these were all interesting ideas. Like I can't help but admit that I was thinking about them. They were curiosities. The episode, like the actual scene-to-scene stuff, is interesting enough. One of the things that I thought was going to happen, actually, so when they go to the mother and they talk to her, and then they meet the son, Kevin, and Kevin's looking at the TV and he's writing down the ones and the zeros, and it turns out to be binary. And when Mulder sends it off to see what it says, if it says anything, well, first of all, a bunch of NSA guys show up and demand to know where he got it from, and they end up raiding the house. And this loses a lot of trust with the mother because they get affected. I mean, not arrested per se, but they get taken in and questioned and whatnot. And when they look at what this data actually is, these ones and zeros, there's, bits of, Earth music in it, symphonies, there's Galileo, there's pieces of art, just little snippets here or there. Mulder refers to it as if someone was changing the channel, every few seconds, only seeing little bits of things. What I actually thought it was getting at here, or where I thought it was going, I thought this was going to be, was it Voyager or something like that, at least I think maybe this is just a movie thing, but I think it was a real thing as well, is that like pieces of Earth culture were put on one of the satellites or the probes that went out into space. And I was wondering if all these pieces of like Earth culture that were here in this data was sort of like coming back to us, and that's what the kid was picking up. And the kid was picking up because he was close to aliens, and now he's a conduit. He's detecting this information in some way. Given the fact that the information eventually leads them to finding the girl, it would maybe suggest the aliens are intentionally sending him a message by the end. So that's interesting. So I think the unpredictability was good. I liked Mulder having conflict with the local sheriff a little bit. Nothing too much, but just like he gets really agitated and kind of like grills the sheriff for not taking the claim seriously. It actually made me think a little bit of Twin Peaks in a weird way, because when the sheriff's talking about this missing girl, who I actually don't think I realized how old she was until this scene. I thought she was like closer to the boy's age until he starts talking about how he's picked her up for drinking. She had lots of boyfriends, and that was the details that were making me think Twin Peaks. I was thinking of Laura Palmer and how she had this really wild sort of lifestyle before she died, and it was sort of adding a little bit of like, oh, what was she up to on that final night? She wasn't where she was supposed to be. Did she run away? Was something else going on? Which is almost unfair to it, because nothing's going to compare to the excellence of Twin Peaks, which, funnily enough, David Duchovny did have a role in a little bit. So, but I was getting some Twin Peaks vibes from that, which is, not necessarily a bad thing to be feeling at an episode. So that, I think there's a whole thing where there's this other teenage girl who gives him some information, and it turns out she's lying, and that she killed the older boyfriend because she's the one who's actually pregnant with his baby, and she got pissed at him and killed him in the woods or something like that. I guess it makes sense to me. Like she seeks out Mulder and Scully and says that the missing girl was going to run away with this older boyfriend. And I guess that makes sense in that she's basically trying to pair her with the guy that she knows she's killed already, so that if they find his dead body, they'll think that the missing girl is the one behind it. She's kind of trying to like set up that trace, I guess, for them. So that makes enough sense, I guess. Of course, they find enough evidence. There's like a doctor's note for an appointment that they can just ask the doctor who had that appointment, and it matches the handwriting of another note she wrote. So very quickly they suss out that she's guilty of something, and Mulder questions her and gets to the truth of it. She waives her right to an attorney. Like Scully just says that, you waived your right to an attorney, and all I could think was, you stupid girl. Like what? Even if you were completely innocent, which she isn't, to be clear, even if she was completely innocent, that is a stupid thing to do. I'm just going to put that out there. She was begging to be caught with that decision. So just worth mentioning. So yeah, I think the case details were interesting enough. It does that thing where it does kind of, and maybe I'm just getting used to how X-Files operates because it's not a show that I've really watched before, but I have felt like an almost, not so much last episode, and last episode notably is the best episode so far, but I think 1, 2, and 4 have all had this thing where it does kind of feel like the focus of the main case, and this one doesn't do it as much admittedly, but when it pivots to the NSA guys coming up, and we kind of have that section in the middle where they're looking into what this data is, and they're demanding Mulder tell them where he got it. The scenes themselves are interesting, but it does kind of feel like we're pivoting away from the focus of the episode. And that was a big problem I had in episode 2, is I felt that everything didn't feel like it sort of fit together. This one's not as big of a deal. It does still fit well enough, and it never loses sight of Mulder caring about finding this girl. Even when Scully's saying you're caring too much about it, we've got a suspect, like it's not going to bring your sister back, and she calls him out on like his motivations and his personal bias and like why he's so driven to try and solve this. And it's the very thing that the FBI superior guy at the start was telling Scully, or asking Scully I should say, is do you think that his personal history is affecting his professional judgment? And frankly, it is. It definitely is. He sounds like someone who's obsessed almost every time he talks about any of this shit. But of course, it's a TV show, so we have to sort of get on board with that. But and that's not to say that I'm complaining about that. I'm saying that we're at a point now where maybe as Scully learns more about him, she's sympathizing with him, that she's sort of letting some of it slide. She's sort of looking out for him. She goes out of her way to try and talk to Mulder instead of letting the superior just, not approve of the trip. And later on, when she sees, no, like this is really affecting him and he's acting out of personal reasons, not because this is what we should be doing as FBI agents, she calls him out on it. She tries to confront it and provoke a reaction out of him for his own good and for their own good as a partnership. And obviously, yes, he ends up being somewhat right about a lot of things. And I think the reason why I don't mind that he's right about a lot of things in this episode, even though I thought it might go the other way, and this might be the hard lesson of no, this was not what you thought it was. And I do hope he has that episode at some point. I think because of that really more nuanced response from the mother about, I don't care how true any of this was, we are never ever like helping you or backing you up or talking about this again. And because at a certain point he can't argue with that, he can't convince them without becoming a crazy stalker who's demanding answers. That's the line where he no longer can cross, is as long as he's still functioning as a reasonable human being. That's the end of the trail, and it's just human choice that's getting in the way. It's not shady, it's not like secrets of like governments, it's not cover-ups, it's just a person making a choice that they think is the right one for them, and he can't fight that. So he still had a bit of that helplessness at the end, but he was right that seemingly about all the alien involvement and the UFOs. Definitely seems that way anyway. So I appreciate that. I don't think it's as tight as the last episode. I don't think it's got the same sense of atmosphere. If I'm going to compare this to the best episode, which was last week's. Last week's had such strong direction and such a strong vibe throughout. This doesn't always have that. Sometimes it felt more like a typical X-Files episode. And I mean that having only watched 4 of them. A lot of this just felt like typical stuff from 1 and 2. And that's okay. But if I'm comparing it to last week's episode, that one definitely comes out on top. This is probably the second best episode so far. Now, I'm not going to keep ranking them as I go because it gets too unwieldy and that would be silly, but we're only a few in, so it's very easy to just kind of say where I feel about each of them kind of individually. So, that's Conduit. I think I covered what I wanted to say. Also, I'll just mention briefly, I meant to say this last time, but last episode was the one that had the shot of Mulder and Scully coming in the door with the torches. It's in the opening titles as low frame rate. I wasn't sure if that was actually going to pop up in an episode, so it was just I got a smile on my face when I saw it last episode. So I thought I'd mention that. But hey, that is my thoughts on Conduit, episode 4 of the X-Files. I will have a sneak peek and look at what the next episode is, since they're so, standalone relative plot-wise. Let's have a look. So the next episode is called The Jersey Devil, which immediately makes me think of a movie called The Last Broadcast, which I saw earlier this year, from 1998. It's kind of a prototype found footage movie. But here's the description on IMDb. Mulder and Scully track a legendary creature that roamed the New Jersey countryside for over 40 years. So, interesting, they're tackling kind of a real, a popular mythological urban legend, I should say. I will say the episode rating for this one is lower than I think any of the episodes so far. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm curious how they'll tackle this. But that is my thoughts on episode 4. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments, and of course, hitting the like button helps out a lot. It helps more people find the reviews and find the channel, so please hit it if you enjoy hearing my thoughts. You can also support me, of course, more directly and MailFuzz in general over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep all the reviews coming. But that is me, so thank you once again. I'll see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?